So I'm pleased to introduce today our Beyond 2025 Steering Committee co-chairs, Anna Killius, who is the Executive Director for the Chesapeake Bay Commission, and also Martha Shimkin, who is the Director for the EPA's Chesapeake Bay Program Office. And I will let them take over now. Thank you, Martha. Thank you, Anna.
So hello, everybody, and thank you so much for your interest, for being here on the live webinar on a Friday lunch hour in our beautiful Chesapeake watershed. From the lands to the shorelines, the headwaters to the rivers and streams and into the bay itself. This is a momentous time for the Chesapeake. We have before us an awesome opportunity to plan a positive path forward. Anna and I have been leading a task force for over a year to gather expertise and perspectives from across the 64,000 square mile watershed to create recommendations and considerations for the future. We are ready to release a draft plan, and this webinar is a first step to talk about what the steering committee has created and is proposing. This is a draft. It's not finished. We want it to be good enough, but not buttoned up, so that we can hear from you and others who want to offer your thoughts and comments so that we can reflect your inputs in a final document that we will then submit to our program leadership for their review and consideration. So we have on this agenda 6 parts. Anna and I will take you through this, and at the end we'll be open for questions. We're really excited to be here to share the background and progress that this program has made with you, as well as our hopes for a bright future in the Chesapeake. So let's get started. Why Beyond 2025? This is pretty much our shorthand for what we who work on this program every day call this effort. It rests on the point that the Chesapeake Bay Program, which is a partnership, works under a voluntary agreement. The Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement that was signed in 2014. We will get into a bit more detail, but in a nutshell, the agreement has set deadlines for many of its goals and outcomes to be completed by 2025. Not all have that deadline, and the agreement does not sunset. It continues on until we agree to something else. And in the case where we have not completed efforts, we are committed to leaning in, doing more, working hard, and not giving up. The work is too important. The environment we live in matters to all of us, to all the people, and to the living resources. Finally, we are responding to a directive from our leaders and tasked by the partnership to form a steering committee for this work and produce a result. I'm going to ask Jake to back up one slide. I was going to talk more about the program thing. Yes, thank you. So just because we're going to be wait, do we have a partnership? Do we have the program slide? It's the one.
Yeah, Jake, go back to me. Yes, thank you.
Sorry about that. So let's see, where was I? So I just wanted to share with you what this partnership contains, who's involved in that. And here you can see the emblems of the 6 states, Washington, D.C., the Chesapeake Bay Commission, and the Environmental Protection Agency that reflects or coordinates with all the federal agencies that are involved. These are the signatories on the Watershed Agreement, and those who have voluntarily agreed to work together to strive for a cleaner, better protected bay and local waters that lead to it. So you can go to the next slide. So because we'll be talking about these various parts of the structure throughout this presentation, we wanted to share with you some basic structure of the organization. We are led by the Chesapeake Executive Council. So those states and organizations I mentioned that create the partnership, the leads for those are the governors, the mayor of DC, so the governors of the states, the mayor of DC, the chair of the Chesapeake Bay Commission, and the administrator of EPA. They meet annually, and they lead an overall give overall direction to the Chesapeake Bay Program. They're advised, and we're all advised by advisory committees. We currently have 3 advisory committees to this partnership. And so because those governors meet annually, they have secretaries or high-level officials who coordinate for them on a more frequent basis. And that is the Principal Staff Committee, made up of secretaries of environment or natural resources or agriculture. I mean, from EPA, it's our regional administrator, there's a political appointee by the president's administration. And in the Chesapeake Bay Commission's case, it is Anna, who's with us here today as the executive director of the commission. They meet on a quarterly basis and direct and respond to needs of the management board. Okay, sorry about that. Having a little technical difficulties. So that management board meets every month and in between and oversees goal implementation teams and works closely with the goal implementation teams. So we have the worker bees who work every day at the goal implementation teams. They respond to and engage with the management board. The management board responds to the principal staff committee, and the principal staff committee informs and responds to the Chesapeake Executive Council. Next slide. So I mentioned that agreement, the 2014 Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement. It has a vision, principles, 10 goals, 31 outcomes. And this is our guiding document that helps us strive towards the goals that we're trying to achieve to restore and protect the Chesapeake Bay and its watershed. We're constantly evaluating, getting updates, posting updates and data, and sharing evaluating and sharing our progress so that we can get the most done and meet the targets that we've set before us. On the next slide, we can share a little bit about those targets. So for every one of those 31 outcomes, we have actually on Chesapeake Progress, a website where you can find this information, a list of all of the outcomes, and a nice dashboard that shows very clearly what's on course for being completed by its target date, what's off course, and a couple that are uncertain. You can go to the next slide. So going back to why are we here and why 2025, that Chesapeake Executive Council charged the Principal Staff Committee with charting a course for and recommending a critical path forward for the Chesapeake Bay Program. So it was two parts in that charge, actually. One that was completed last year was evaluate where we are and how we're doing. And the one due back to the Chesapeake Executive Council this year is providing recommendation to the Chesapeake Executive Council on a path forward, taking in cutting edge science, new findings, the need for partnership, and providing a recommendation on how to go forward. Next slide. So the Beyond 2025 effort and the steering committee that's been established to work on that effort was established because we need to chart that critical path forward. And it's not a matter of sitting down and writing something up. It's been an intensive year-long effort to outline, dedicate effort, find experts, speak, reach out, hear from people, listen, and pull together a draft plan. I just want to take a moment before we move on to thank all those who have been involved in creating this draft plan that we're getting ready to release. There have been 29 steering committee members. There have been 29 alternates. There have been many of our staff who are supporting us behind the scenes. There's a communications effort led by Rachel and others who got to meet at the very start of this webinar. And there have been a lot of people who are so interested. They just log into our public meetings anyway to hear how it's going. So we're really thankful for all the effort, interest, and work of so many that have gotten us to this point. So now we're going to share a little bit more about that, and I think I'm turning it over to Anna.
Thanks, Martha. So I'm going to take you through the steering committee's process over the last little over a year. Next. So just so you can see, this is who was represented on our steering committee. It consists of representatives of all of the jurisdictions, the advisory committees, the commission, EPA, and all of the federal agencies, the core federal agencies part of this partnership, and two non-voting members that represented kind of the NGO and external stakeholder community that helps fill out our work. And I can't forget to mention our goal implementation teams as well. They were all represented. So it was quite a robust steering committee coming together to draft some recommendations. Our aim in developing this report was to provide recommendations for consideration that speak to what we do as a partnership, so the goals and outcomes of the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement, and how we work together as a partnership, the structure and governance of the way we meet each other each day in this partnership. We broke our work into 2 phases because I think we understand pretty quickly that it was going to be a long road to kind of chart this path and put us on the path. So phase 1 is really about charting the path, determining the scope and breadth of what the partnership should undertake beyond 2025. Phase 2 will come after this report and after it's been reviewed and acted upon. That begins in 2025. We implement this plan and start to implement the changes that you'll see in the draft. Here's what we've done so far to kind of help us pull this report together. We broke out into 5 small groups of subject matter experts, both from within the steering committee and beyond. And we pulled them together to kind of think about these big overarching topics, which I'll talk about in a second. We also hired a contractor who's retained to help complete an independent evaluation of the partnership from the outside using questions that the steering committee helped to develop through a number of different ways, including interviews and document review. Those small groups that I mentioned, they were organized by these 5 key themes: clean water, climate change, healthy watersheds, people, and shallow water habitats. Those were small groups and themes that we talked about as a steering committee to determine kind of what were those big picture themes we wanted to explore. And a lot of them were informed by a number of the different reports and studies and conversations that had come up in the partnership, even before the steering committee started working. This was our process. So the steering committee kind of tasked those 2, we'll call them evaluators, to help pull together some thoughts for us to look at. So we have our small groups and that independent contractor, ERG. Those evaluators created source materials. So the small groups put together findings. We asked for 5 findings per small group, all summarized in 1-page briefs. And the ERG put together an evaluation report. That source material came back to the steering committee for consideration, and it was the steering committee's responsibility to synthesize that material so that we could put together a draft for public input and for eventually the principal staff committee's review to inform what the executive council chooses to do at its meeting later this year. There were a number of materials and reports that were important to the steering committee, to ERG, to our small groups. This is a selection of those. I'm sure there were even more that are not listed here, but just gives you a sense of all of the different ideas and thoughts that were kind of informing our process that needed to be synthesized into the report that you will have in front of you shortly. So as I've mentioned, synthesizing the findings, that was the biggest component of the last couple of months. We wanted to have high-level recommendations and considerations in each of the Chesapeake Bay Program's core mission areas: science, restoration and conservation, and partnership. So we've developed those. We also wanted to particularly highlight potential actions that the Executive Council might take this year and in kind of the subsequent years to propel the partnership forward and to prepare our watershed agreement to continue to guide us in this next phase of our work. So that is how we focused our efforts in synthesizing the materials to develop the draft report, which we will touch on now. And I'll hand it back to Martha to kick that off.
All right, so before we get into it, let's we give you just a moment to read this disclaimer. I just want to remind you that we're an action team with a ton to offer. Thousands of hours, hundreds of people reached out to, listened to, and written comments received. This work is only an action team like ours could do. And to create the best recommendations, we have put all this effort in, and we have this draft. This is not yet a final document, as I mentioned before, and this will be used to first send through our management board, and then present to the Principal Staff Committee for them to use in creating recommendations to the Executive Council. So don't move it yet, but since that was just a little bit boring, just wanted to share our excitement that we get to share this with you. So I'm going to ask for a little audience participation. Take your fingertips and do a little drum roll. And go ahead, Jake. So we'll start with the outline. We have a 3-part outline to what's going to be released on July 1. The first part is a bottom line up front. It is an executive summary for those executive leaders at the top, the management board. Again, in our mind, what we would suggest presenting, but it has a lot of steps to go through first. It is short and to the point and has a couple of recommendations. There are basically 2 recommendations at the top with some background and recognizing all the progress that has been made by so many over the many, many years of this program. So that's part 1. Part 2 is kind of what Anna was just talking about, synthesizing and analyzing all those sources that we have considered over the time to provide more depth and more recommendations that might be at a management board or lower level, but recommendations for the good of the partnership and good of the program that we have before us. And then the third part is that list of source materials with hypertext links so anybody can go and find those small group recommendations, the contracted report on the partnership, and all those scientific and policy papers that we have referred to over the past year. So moving on, I'm going to present part 1 and then turn it over to Anna for part 2 and 3. So what's coming up? What are we planning to do? You see a photo here of the front cover of the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement, and the steering committee is recommending for consideration, waiting to hear comments, that we stick with this agreement. It's a good agreement. It has a lot of good content. It's been amended before and it's open for amendment. So we're suggesting that the Principal Staff Committee and ultimately the Executive Council consider keeping with this agreement, but updating, amending, optimizing. Next slide. The other recommendation we're making is the partnership is strong. Its organization is good. We have worked together and we're better together than on our own, each individually. So we recommend bolstering that partnership and also looking at the sophistication that exists within any partnership or any organization, especially one that's 40 years old, looking at that and seeing how it could be streamlined, see how it could be simplified so that it is most efficiently run. And so the other recommendation is the partnership is strong. Let's look how we can streamline and simplify some of the work that gets done through this partnership. And now I'm going to turn it over to Anna.
All right. So those are the recommendations in part 1, right? The recommendations that rise to the level we think of Executive Council action or review. Part 2 takes you into the full scope of all the recommendations separated on those 3 key mission areas: science, restoration and conservation, and partnership. For each of these themes, each of these categories, you'll see recommendations kind of broken down into different themes. So for science, you'll see recommendations broken down into the themes of optimizing monitoring, modeling and analysis, integrating existing and new science findings in decision-making, resource allocation, and communication strategies, and prioritizing research that addresses knowledge gaps in existing and emerging challenges. You'll find recommendations in bold, where we find the most consensus and support within the steering committee. And then under those, you'll see more considerations about how that might look or what we might consider as we move through that discussion in the future. Under the restoration and conservation category, we have, again, 3 themes: support system scale conservation and restoration planning and implementation for habitats and communities, review and, where necessary, revise the existing goals and outcomes and management strategies to more effectively guide the partnership's restoration and conservation efforts beyond 2025, and improve the partnership's holistic approach to planning, prioritization, progress tracking, and accountability. And then finally, for partnership, we have 4 themes. Adopt a systems approach to streamline governance and structure, enhance capacity building and administrative and technical assistance through local networks, strengthen the partnership's capacity to ensure watershed restoration is relevant to all communities, and enhance communications and transparency to foster long-term success.
So now we want to talk with you about this public feedback session, which is just about to open up. Go ahead to the next slide. Here's the information that you need to know, and you can feel free to read this. Just to point out that we're releasing this draft document on Monday, July 1, 2024, and it will be open for public feedback for 60 days, closing on August 30, 2024. Anyone is welcome to provide feedback. We can only receive feedback in this email address that's given. And so please use that email address to submit your feedback. You should receive an email confirming that that's been received. All comments will be posted on our webpage. We'll make sure that it is that they are posted, and comments will be categorized and reviewed by subject matter experts, either part of the steering committee that we have or others that we reach out to. We will also, once incorporated and once we've incorporated the comments into our draft and we're ready to create a final draft, a final proposal, we will provide and post a redlined version of how that document was changed based on the public feedback. And then we'll finally have a revised version that will be submitted to the management board and presented by the steering committee, and then move forward to the principal staff committee in preparation for the executive council meeting this year. Next slide. Our fabulous comms team, communications team, has provided some tips for you. I'll let you take a moment to read those. We're providing areas for focus. If you can follow those, that would be great. So kind of prompts or categories. So you'll see that. Focus on what the recommendations suggest. Save actions for later. This is the what at this time. Next slide. And Anna will take it from here.
All right, before we get to questions, just to go through the timeline so you know what to expect as far as next steps from the steering committee and the rest of the program throughout the end of this year. So we are launching into our public feedback period between July 1st and August 30th, a full 60-day period. During that time, we will be collecting your feedback, reviewing it as it comes in, and also making sure that the rest of the program, the rest of the Chesapeake Bay program understands what's in the draft report, and we can get feedback internally as well. In September, we will be revising the report based on all the feedback that we have received, incorporating what we can into the report and, getting it prepared so we can post both our final version from the steering committee and the redline version for everyone by the end of the month. At that time, it will go to the management board and the principal staff committee in October for them to review and decide what to do with it. And then in December, the executive council will be presented with findings, and they will have the opportunity, based on the recommendations they receive from their principal staff committee, to take action to move the Chesapeake Bay program forward beyond 2025. One final reminder that this is the email address at which you can submit your comments by August 30th. Although I will say the earlier you can get them to us, the better, because we will be taking a peek at those as they come in to help inform our revisions as early as possible. And at this time, we're going to go to questions.
Questions you have, and please ask them.
Sorry, I muted myself, so say that again.
Thank you, everybody. Just as a reminder, you can ask any questions in the Q&A box that is at the bottom of your screen. We have 2 so far. I'm going to just go out of order because I think one pertains to something we just spoke about first. And can one of you just elaborate a little bit? You mentioned a systems approach under the partnership section. Could you talk about that a little bit?
I would say probably the best thing to do would be read the considerations under that that theme, because it will kind of speak to what we mean by systems approach. I think one thing that we're really thinking about is in streamlining the governance. We know that we need to break down silos, talk amongst the different parts of our program, and then make sure that information is coming up through decision makers. So thinking about that whole system and streamlining that system in order to make sure that good information, good science-based information is coming up and informing strong decisions in a way that's transparent and effective.
Our next question is about the ERG reports. Did that report focus on the partners' relationships or any of the performance of the partnership?
I can take that. Checking sound. Okay. So yeah, thank you for that question. The ERG report, so the independently contracted contractor report that we had gotten done through a contract. That was to focus on the structure of the partnership and some of the kind of the things that work and the things that need attention. So it was much more on kind of the governance, the structure, how things work, where are there complexities, how could those be addressed? And it resulted in considerations for the steering committee, and those were incorporated into the draft that you will see. That ERG report is also one of those documents that will be posted in full as part of the source documents.
The next question that just came in is, thank you so much for that process description. I'm curious if there was any professional engineers or INCOFE certified system engineers involved in the development of the draft plan.
I will start and Anna can add. We didn't take the resumes, but there are engineers throughout this program. They're very important to the work we do. And I would be really surprised if there weren't a large number of engineers that have been consulted and participated and provided input and various opportunities for that. Did you want to add anything?
No.
Okay.
So within our goals and outcomes, there are I think at least 2 that are related to Blue Crab. So if the program does move forward with reviewing our outcomes as the steering committee has recommended, I would anticipate that there will be good discussion about what those outcomes target for the program, and if they're the right targets, and how that outcome can best lead us moving forward. I'm sure that the recent actions and the recent science will all be part of that discussion.
So I don't have a name of a specific document, but can share that there is a recent document in the past maybe 5 years that has been published on climate change and the Chesapeake Bay. There have also been many articles published on climate change related to the Chesapeake Bay from the scientists that participate regularly in this partnership.
The 2014 Watershed Agreement does not lapse or change. We're still all part of that as a partnership. So there's no deadline per se. We, in our recommendations in the first part of the report, do suggest that the Executive Council consider affirming that continuing commitment at the upcoming Executive Council to kick off kind of the next chapter or the next phase of the work of leading the partnership beyond 2025. Good question. The Chesapeake Bay Commission is a tri-state legislative body. We are created in state law in 3 states, Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. Our members come from those states. Most of them are state legislators, but we also have a gubernatorial appointee and a citizen member from each of those states as well. And our job is to be a legislative voice within the Chesapeake Bay program. Most of the other actors are representative of the executive branches. And so we are that legislative voice that kind of fills out the conversation. So that is what makes us different from the EPA.
So I can just quickly mention EPA is a federal agency, member of the President's Cabinet, And our mission is to it's just protect human health and the environment. I was going to say restore and protect the Chesapeake Bay, which is kind of within the mission, but protect human health and the environment. And the employees, about, I don't know how many employees we are anymore, but more than 10,000 know that mission and implement that every day.
And I just want to apologize. Apparently, I was told that folks have not been able to hear the questions. I've been reading them. I am sorry for that. They are all in the question and answer box if you want to see them. Hopefully you can hear them now. The next question is there a water sharing agreement for irrigation? Have you shared ideas with similar watershed associations out west?
I don't know that I can speak to the first part of the question, but I can say that the commission has been in conversation with lots of different organizations across the country and I think around the world about what we do here in the Chesapeake Bay because it is a model. So I think there is exchanging of ideas, but I can't speak to the first part of the question.
And we have no other questions. Again, we will just pause for a few more seconds, see if anything comes in. And we do have one more to follow up on that questions. Are there any plans to look at a bay-wide water supply planning?
Sure. Do you have something to say? Yep. So we're conferring here. While it doesn't look like it, Anna and I are right next to each other. So I have not, in the time that we've spent, and it's been a lot of time, I've not heard a lot of conversation about water supply sharing in the conversations we've had. So again, this is a draft. We're looking for comments and ideas. It is not complete. It's good enough, but ready to hear and to listen to others' perspectives. And so if there is a topic for us to consider, hopefully someone will put that in the comments.
Do you anticipate that new science-based Bay health indicators will form part of your recommendations, or are those set by the scientific community?
You can start. So right now, I mean, we anticipate anything, right? We are a very science-based organization. We are underpinned by cutting-edge science across the watershed and with many of our partners throughout all the work that we do. We have a rich set of indicators at Chesapeake Progress, which is the website where we place all the indicators and then that dashboard we shared. So should there be new indicators, should there be new outcomes, that definitely could be part of what results from this work. And they would be science-based, policy-based, data-driven, and written in a way that they're clearly defined with time-bound limits.
And excuse me, I just wanted to answer one question myself because this is the second one that's come in. Folks are asking, how do we get a copy of the draft report and the resource materials? The draft report will be posted on our website, chesapeakebay.net, on Monday, July 1st. If you registered for this webinar, you're going to get an email on Monday with a link to that report. And in the report, we do have links to all the resource materials, so you will be able to see them there. And the only other question I see is, in any of the recommendations, did you have discussion around stream restoration?
To my memory, stream restoration was talked about in some of the small groups that were related to habitats, shallow water habitats, and maybe watershed, healthy watersheds as well. So I think there was discussion of it. You'll have to double check the report to see if there's something specific to that, but it may be something you can find in the one pages from the small groups.
So one thing I think that'll be also helpful to the audience, a question just came in and this has come before. Can you both talk a little bit about the difference between how the steering committee is working on this for the watershed agreement and then how the Bay TMDL is different or how they fit together?
Do you want to start that?
Sure.
So I would say that the total maximum daily load, which is a pollutant diet for pollutants that go into the water, specific in this case to sediment, nitrogen, and phosphorus, is somewhat reflected in the watershed agreement, but they are not one and the same. And I forget the rest of the question, just the difference between the two.
I think if you could talk just to set that straight, we're obviously, this work is looking at the watershed agreement recommendation. We're making a recommendation to revise it. That doesn't mean we're not talking about changing deadlines for the TMDL, but the TMDL does have an impact on some of the outcomes of the watershed agreement.
Right, and it's even reflected in the water quality goal in the current agreement. So they are possibly in tandem or reflect each other, but the TMDL is an EPA and state effort to calculate loads that keep too much pollution from getting into the waterways, and they do absolutely impact the water quality, the living resources, and the goals that we are striving for. But they are different than the watershed agreement. Did you want to add anything? Sure.
So I think I'll just add to that by saying that in the recommendations, there's no notion of changing the TMDL or changing the overall targets to the pollution loads, the pollution load reductions called for in the TMDL. There are recommendations or discussions on how we might approach reaching those targets over time in different ways to make us potentially more effective or to get more living resource response from our work over time. So not a change to the overall targets, just potentially some thoughts on how we can reach those over time.
Yep, I think that's great. And just the last question I see right now is, can you talk a little bit, how has the Principal Staff Committee been involved and welcomed everything that's been going on with the report so far?
I'll start.
So it has been our responsibility as co-chairs to brief the Principal Staff Committee at different meetings of the committee over the last year. So we've kind of kept them updated on the process, the progress, and more recently, as we've put the report together, what we think the top line recommendations are going to be. So they have been involved and providing their guidance to us over time in that forum. I wear 3 different hats because I'm both a management board member, a Principal Staff Committee member, and the steering committee co-chair. So in that sense, I've had a lot of conversations about kind of bridging the space between the committee, the steering committee, and the Principal Staff Committee that is eventually going to receive this report. So they've been heavily interested in what we're doing. But as we said, this is our report, the steering committee's report at this time. So they're waiting just as anxiously to hear what the feedback is to that report.
And we don't have any other questions at the moment. Again, we'll just pause to see if anything else comes in. Okay, well, we will then start to wrap up. Did you want to say something, Martha?
So I just wanted to close out by saying thank you for giving us your time. We're really not anxious, but in a good way, excited to hear what some of the comments are or what all of the comments are that will be coming our way. We're thrilled to have the opportunity to share the work in progress with you and others now. And I want to also shout out to our communications team, to Rachel and the other people behind the scenes who are helping put on this webinar and helping with the overall public feedback.
There's we have one more question that
Get into if you'd like to take it.
and that's just asking about how environmental justice may be factored into the revised agreement.
Yes, so as Anna presented at the start, those groups that we had, one of them was people, and that people group definitely had a very strong focus on environmental justice, on diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And there was a lot you can see in that, not only in the analysis and synthesis section, that part 2, but also in the source documents from the in the part 3. We do as well have is it a directive from the Executive Council on DEIJ, diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, and have been working to incorporate that and know there's so much more to do. So this is an important topic. We do say, as in this steering committee, that the work that we are doing as a partnership is done by people, for people, and for all communities.
Okay, great. Well, Martha, Anna, thank you so very much. As we mentioned, this will be posted on Monday for public feedback, and you guys will all have 60 days. We encourage you to comment, read it, share it, send us your ideas, and we look forward to seeing what comes in. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending today, and have a great weekend.